Well, good afternoon to anybody who may be listening to this message. Whatever I'm going to say, who can say? It's a good job that Restore Britain is called Restore Britain, because if we refer to the Bible, restoration is the term used in reference to Israel. That this is what will happen. This is what always happens when we return to the Lord and Israel is restored. He couldn't really call it Restore Israel, of course, because nobody knows the relationship between Israel and Britain. So Restore Britain is exactly right. It's not reformation, as another party would have it. Reforming something implies that it wasn't perfect to begin with, and it needs to be reshaped. But from a biblical perspective, it was perfect at one time. When we were under constitutional law, the Bill of Rights, and when England was a Christian country. This was a perfect system that had been developed. And then, of course, wicked men came in and started to corrupt it. But it's under the hand of God. God is pouring out his Spirit on the land in these days, and he has been doing for some time. But Rupert is, I've really praised Rupert in a recent video, and I have nothing to retract from that. As I've thought more deeply about this issue, because Rupert is really taking on powers and principalities. When Haman came into the palace of King Ahasuerus in the book of Esther and started to plot the destruction of our people, as it seems our leaders have returned to the same plan in recent times, or it's been going on for a long time, of course. But Ahasuerus was a just king, and the hand of God came into it because it was revealed to him as he looked through the records, and he found the record that showed that he had been helped by Mordecai, Esther's father, and gradually the entire plot of Haman unraveled, and Haman was hanged on his own gibbet, is it, or gibbet? 10 cubits high or more. But in Britain, we don't have a righteous king. We have a royal family that has been going astray for many, many years, centuries. The level of privilege that is enjoyed by the royal family is absolutely disproportionate and ungodly, because where no light shines, then corruption tends to form and spread. And we need open transparency from our king. And yet they guard their affairs so secretively that really nothing is allowed out. And when another honest man, Andrew Lowney, is investigating these things and has been doing for many years, the poor fellow has to remortgage his house to face the legal actions that are being levied against him to dissuade him from speaking, as we are dissuaded from speaking under threat of law on many issues. So, it's a very serious battle and a very formidable enemy that must be defeated, but will be defeated because help will be provided. Faithful men will step forward. There will be somebody in the palace, and the truth will ultimately come out. It's an absolutely shameful state of affairs that the throne of England should be such a den of iniquity. But so it is. And Andrew Mountbatten has just prized open unwittingly the lid on that Pandora's box. And really, we understand that we've only seen the very tip of the iceberg, as it were. Rupert has confidently stated that when Restore Britain comes to power, all the information in the Epstein files will be made public in unredacted form. Well, that's obviously a red rag to a bull, isn't it? Because we understand that the palace in particular will be keen to keep as many details that might concern them absolutely secret, under conditions of national security and secret services and, shadowy organizations. So, it's Daniel in the lion's den. This is, really, many people, it would seem, have lost their lives on this kind of a quest with what they call the firm. The same word is used to describe the mafia sometimes. It is like a mafia. It's a mafia-like organization, as it is in Italy, the collaboration between the Catholic Church, the Vatican, and the mafia and the politicians holding the country to ransom. But in England, we thought we were a step above all that stuff, but in actual fact, we are in a worse condition, because at least there, the corruption is recognized. Now, in this country, any sort of reporting into the royal family, up until the 1950s, when I was born, the newspapers and the BBC, they would never publish anything that wasn't pre-approved by the palace. There was no question of investigating, because they would lose their jobs. It just wasn't done. There was an absolute wall of privacy and protection erected around the royal family when news media started to flourish. And it stayed in place for half a century, longer. And it's only beginning to crumble now. And when it falls, it'll fall like the Boeing wall. It will be a calamity and it will be sudden. This is what we're currently experiencing. I think this is why there's this sense of pregnancy almost about this moment. Something is about to break. Well, clearly they hope to repel it by fomenting civil unrest. They have a great interest in spreading chaos and forcing people, or not forcing, but claiming and, to some extent facilitating those who would engage in acts of sedition. So, opposing the wicked forces by means of physical resistance or all sorts of tricks. But we're English, we don't get involved in sedition. We are a nation formed under God. And we're instructed to obey the laws as far as possible. And so we will continue to do that, but the law itself will fall upon the wicked perpetrators of ungodliness and injustice. The stone will fall upon them and grind them into dust. There's no stopping this process. And it's not a question of the people rising up. There's more of us than there are of them, as people used to repeat this constantly in the truth movement. People power, power to the people. The people do. The power is ours constitutionally, and this ultimately will be restored. But it's not through a mob or a popular uprising that it will be done. A mob or a popular uprising is exactly what our enemies want, and it will enable them to, they believe it will enable them to cover their tracks. I mean, can you imagine civil unrest in Britain would be a perfect moment perhaps for the most wicked and protected members of the royal family to disappear, claiming national security and safety needs and so on and so forth. But it's unstoppable. You can't, just because I think it's a bad idea, there'll be another 3 or 4 people who disagree and they say, no, we have to fight back. Because of our nature, I think, as Englishmen and women and Scotsmen and Welshmen and Irish and so on, when we are under God, then we look to a leader. The English people have tremendous courage and resilience, but we operate under a leader. We don't operate as a mob. We never have. And that's our strength, really. And those who would go out in the streets and operate in an unruly manner will suffer very bad consequences from it, and they won't achieve anything. They will only disrupt the unfolding of truth. That's how I would see it. But I don't have a crystal ball. I do have the Holy Bible, and it's a great blessing. And I had a great opportunity yesterday. Really, I was sitting alone at the church breakfast. I've gone along to it the last couple of times just because I don't have anybody to talk to, and so I don't go to the Bible study, but I'll go up and have a cup of tea and a bowl of soup. And I sit alone because, my presence isn't particularly sought after. That now I notice there's quite a few tables that have reserved written on them, and groups of friends like to meet up there, and they don't want somebody like me who they don't know. And the tables tend to be racially divided also. There's quite a lot of Ishmaelites that will go in there as well. They don't care that it's a church. They just go for the cheap breakfast and the cup of tea and the chat, I suppose. So I keep away from, all those sorts of tables. And I'd sat at the very end of a very long table. And I was sitting at the end there, so I wasn't really presenting any kind of threat to anybody. But it was the very minister of the church that came and deliberately sat opposite to me, as he wanted to talk, obviously. And I was very honoured that he would do that. He didn't have a particular message for me. I think he just wanted to chat. And also because I always have a Bible open before me so I've got no one to talk to, so I have the Bible. And he couldn't really ignore that, perhaps. But, we had a very interesting chat. Although we are, very far apart in terms of, understanding of the Bible and the position of the church and all the rest of it. But I don't get into all that stuff. But I had the chance to speak quite, I hope, cogently and forcefully in relation to the matter of which Bible is the Bible. And he's a man who reads the Bible according to his words. And he told me that he reads he also the authorized version, but he reads also modern versions, and he finds it hard to remember where he's remembering a quotation and he can't remember in which version it is. It makes it more difficult to find. I just pointed out to him, look, we need to settle this matter of a Bible, because if the Bible's true, there must be a Bible. And if the Bible describes a covenant between God and his people, Israel, no matter how you define, well, not entirely no matter, because if you define Israel as some, minor warmongering, apparently, group of people in the desert somewhere, then it doesn't have the same immediacy. But if the Bible is indeed a covenant between God and his people, his elect, his chosen people, then a covenant is a legal document. And no legal document can stand if there are two or more versions of it. It destroys its legal effect immediately. That's an important point. It's not a religious point. It's a what do you call it? An epistemological point. You can't have law without contract and you can't have contract without singularity. There's no getting away from it. And he agreed with me on the level of literacy in this country as well, because I said, the Bible used to be read in churches, but now it's not, and that's why most people don't know what's in it. They don't read the Bible, they don't read anything. A lot of people won't read a book. They might read the newspaper, but they don't read it, so nobody knows what's in it. I go to these events, and they're all, not all of them, but many of the people there are churchgoers, and they're part of the congregation. Honestly, I don't think I've met one of them that has the faintest idea what's written in the Bible. I might have met one or two, but really it's very, very rare that somebody would know what's written in the Bible. They just don't know. Well, they haven't read it. So, it's just so important that we bring the Bible back into church. And I was reminded, in Scripture, that I can't remember his name, Jehoiada, was it Jehoash? At the end of the second book of Chronicles, when Israel is restored, and there's a righteous king who removes the idols, and burns down the groves, and removes the high places as well, and breaks down the houses of the Sodomites, and works to restore Israel under God with an upright heart. And at a certain point, the scribe finds the book of the law in the temple. The book of the law was found, and he puts it in the hands of the king, who apparently hasn't read it. And the king reads the book of the law and then weeps and tears his clothes. He weeps. The same happens in the book of Nehemiah, perhaps less dramatically, but again, the book of the law is brought. If Israel's going to be restored, it can only be restored when the book of the law is read and returned to the church, to the temple, because the action is being carried out under God, and God is only revealed in the Holy Bible. Of course, in these Old Testament books, so the book of the law would have been the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Now we have a far more complete Bible, but it is the book of the law ultimately, even though there are many more stories, but ultimately they are all illustrations of the law and how it works and how people work together and how people will avoid it and the trickery of man. That's the book that we need to bring into the church and just start reading it. It's not, you don't need a degree to read it, but you need to read it aloud and to have strong readers, people who can speak loudly and clearly and pronounce well. And I'm sure there are many people who can do that. I would tend to avoid having women just for that reason, because women tend to be a little bit more soft-spoken perhaps. But it's a task or a pleasure that can be shared by all. You have to remember there are people who are just illiterate. they can't really read so well at all. There are people that have eyesight problems. That's why the church needs, that's the role of the church, surely. If you're not going to read the Bible in church, where on earth will it be found? Oh, well, of course, for those who are faithful, you're going to have a Bible on your table somewhere and you read it in your house. But, with the Psalms and, the many beautiful passages of the Bible, it's just wonderful to be able to read them together without having to then spend hours telling everybody what it all means. I mean, you don't really know, do you? That's another conversation, and really it's a conversation between, a man and his conscience. Because we have a freedom of, religious interpretation. We don't have to conform to a mainstream view. The important thing is that we pledge allegiance to the King of Kings, because if we're not, if Britain is not if a resident of our nations has no wish to hear the Bible or any belief in the headship, in the kingship of Lord Jesus Christ, then they can't stand under the king either, when we have a righteous king, of course. It's treasonous, because if the king is the head, then the king is only the head when the King of Kings stands above our king. And if the subjects deny the authority of the King of Kings, then they also deny the authority of the crown. But now, of course, it would seem, a Muslim king. The country is in an absolutely terrible state, really terrible. But it's getting sorted out, and it might happen quite quickly. We think about all this talk of deportations and so on and so forth, and it causes a bit of consternation and a bit of discussion. And there are cases, I think, as I've said before, that the other nations around us are sympathetic to our cause and have shown carefulness and love in their dealings, but there are many that haven't and don't. And really, those people have no business in our nation whatsoever. And, if you read the story of Sennacherib, when he comes, the Assyrian king, who comes against Jerusalem during the reign of King Hezekiah, and he comes with a great host, and Jerusalem can't defend itself. We don't have the numbers, we don't have the chariots. We are besieged, there's no food. The situation is desperate. But what happens, and how does it happen? We can't understand it. But overnight, 185,000 men of the Assyrian army are found dead in the morning. Anybody who will oppose the process that's ongoing, we need to think that we are under a mighty God. Not a God that speaks vain and idle words. And so people need to be very careful how they behave. So do I. We all do. This is serious stuff. And a change can come in the blink of an eye. And then there's plenty of time for long regret and recrimination. But, we might be saved suddenly. Who can say? God bless this day.